Hi guys, Ryan Gill here with HuntPrimitive, where we entertain, educate, and inspire, and we're working really hard to get you where you want to be in your primitive building and hunting adventures. And what we are going to work on today is making an Osage bow. So stick with us. So finally getting around to making a bow making video for y'all. Now I've done already a full Stone Age bow building tutorial, and that can be found on the HuntPrimitive YouTube channel as well. This one's going to be here in the shop, well mostly in the shop, and it's going to be how somebody like you is probably going to want to build your bow with some more modern tools, a piece of seasoned Osage Orange wood, and we're going to really work through this process in a quick but very comprehensive manner. So how is this going to be different than so many other people's bow building videos? Well, number one, I do this for a full-time living. In fact, I have so much time invested into bow making as a career that I am really not influenced by other bow makers. So I don't watch other bow making tutorials and that sort of thing. So what you're going to get from me is just information I've accumulated over the years. It's not regurgitated from somebody else. So there's probably going to be some very unique stuff. There might be some stuff that conflicts with what some other folks have said, but it also works very well for me. And we're going to be moving through this, like I said, pretty quick. So if you want to know, say like all the little nuances, all the little details about building better and better and better bows, you can check out the HuntPrimitive How-to Directory at huntprimitive.com. It's completely free. And if you go there, you can search under bow making and look for, say, how to bend recurves, how to put tip overlays on, all that kind of stuff. What we're going to be doing is going really quick, start to finish, on what you need to know. All the information that you need to know is in this video on how to take a piece of Osage with some hand tools, maybe a little few power tools here in the shop, nothing crazy, and turn it into a hunting bow that you can enjoy for many, many years. So follow along with this one, and let's get on to the build. Alright, so what we've got here, we've got a piece of Osage Orange, and this piece has been seasoning now for, it says the cut date is 5 of 2019. It is now October of 2020, so I am a bare minimum on 1 year for season time. Okay, can you do it faster in some circumstances? Yes. If you want to build very good bows, you let your Osage season at least a year. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the growth rings, at least that we're looking at here, okay? And this one's not a bad one to start with because it's got some thicker rings, which will be easier, hopefully, for y'all to see. Now, you can chase thinner rings, you can chase thicker rings, and we're going to get into what chasing it means. But really what we're shooting for in this is a very, just an easy, classic, say an American flat bow. Nothing fancy, but it's going to cover the real basics of bow building that you're here to see. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to chase a ring on the back of this, okay? And again, if you need to know, I'm not going to cover, and I'm not going to keep reiterating this, but I'm not going to cover how long your bow should be, how far your draw length is. Those are all the little nuances. You can get that information in my primitive bow building book or on the HuntPrimitive directory. This is the basics of what you need to know to get that bow built. So this stave is 61 inches long, okay? And we're going to make an American style of flat bow out of it, and cured Osage Orange. We're going to chase a ring. So I'm going to bring you in and start showing you what I'm talking about on chasing a ring, because with Osage Orange, you have to chase a ring on the back of your stave. And the back is the part that when the bow's finished and you hold it away from you, the back is the part that faces away from you. That needs to be one growth ring. So let's look at these here again. Let's look at the growth rings, okay? It needs to be that we remove wood down to one single growth ring from this end of the bow stave all the way to this end. It has to be one growth ring. If that growth ring is violated as the bow is bent, it can pop a splinter, okay? So one more mention before I kick this thing into full gear, okay? is I'm not necessarily going to stop and say, this is why I do this first. Okay, so follow these directions in the order that I do them. If you want to know why I do them in this order, again, pick up the book or look in the directory and hopefully you find a video on that. But if you follow the directions in the order that I do them, you'll have great success. Alright, so I just use a vintage draw knife. It's not terribly sharp. It doesn't need to be super sharp. In fact, I would avoid one that was exceptionally sharp. This one's interesting. We have a knot we have to deal with, a little bit of a wonky spot that's going to be in the handle, and then a couple little pin knots and stuff along the way. That knot's not going to hurt anything in our bow. Now look, if you can see how I'm holding that as I pinch it up against my body. I know you can't see the whole thing. A lot of times I take a piece of leather, put it against that, and then I pinch this, say, up against the workbench on this end, and then it's up against my body on this end, okay? And the reason that I don't use any sort of workbench or stave press is because I like to be able to move the piece of wood around, flip it around, and move fast. I'm all about working quick. Like I said, I do it for a living. So if you want to use a bench or a vise, that's perfectly fine, but that's why I don't, okay? So what I'll do is I'm going to start here. Typically I say start in the middle of your bow stave, but I'm going to start kind of right here where you can see it. Whenever I get around the knot, I'll work around that knot so you can kind of see what I'm doing. We're going to cover each step a little bit once and then move right on. So what we're going to do is get up under until you hit the next growth ring. And you'll know when you hit it. There's something a little chalky about that wood. Right there it is. Okay? So let's see if you can see that on the camera. So I hit there. You can see that. There's a total different growth ring here, and that's the growth ring now that we're going to chase. So we established it. Now instead of working all over the place, we're going to start on that growth ring and be careful, and we're going to get right up under. There's some spongy looking wood right here. Let's see if you can see that really good. So you see that little pithy wood? That's like the space in between the solid rings, and that's what you're going to put the draw knife in when you're ready to get up under it and work it. So what I do is I work all the way across this way on the bow stave until I've established that one ring. And I'm not pulling real hard, I'm just letting the tool do its work. Then I'll kind of back drag and scrape. That establishes my growth ring. Okay? Let's look at that now here one more time. I know you'll be able to see it as soon as the camera focuses for us. There you go. Now you can see the difference in there's a growth ring higher right here. Okay, so this is one solid growth ring, and this is where the next growth ring is as well. You can see the color change with that little pithy wood I was talking about. So once you've got that started and it's done from this side across, now you can start working back to you. And I recommend starting in the middle and working back on one growth ring and then flip the stave around and go this way the other direction, because if you start here you could end up actually running out a growth ring and have to start all over. Or if you start like doing a spot here and then you all of a sudden you start down there and hope you're going to meet in the middle, chances are you could be at a totally different growth ring. So once you've established one, stick with it. Okay? So that's how we're going to do this. Give me 1 second here to catch this little piece up. And when you're quick doing it, like me, you'll be able to knock chasing a ring out in somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. But since this is probably your first time doing this, expect that it's probably going to take you at least an hour, potentially several hours. So don't be in a rush like I am. The only reason I'm in a rush is because I'm teaching you. And I'm wanting to keep this short because I know you want to get down to the next stage. Alright, so let's readjust the camera because I want you to see this knot and how we're going to work around it. Alright, so I hope I can really capture this on camera for you. Okay, so I'm working down, chasing the ring towards this knot. The important thing to do is don't just cut right across that knot, okay? You have to follow the natural grain. So we're going to slow down just a little bit around this knot, and you let your tool follow the grain instead of forcing it up and over. Okay, if you cut straight across it, that's a weak spot in your bow, and almost always going to break. Even if not right away, down the line, it stands a very good chance of breaking. So I'm going to continue to chase my ring. Let me go ahead and do that. And I'm doing it kind of backwards because I want you all to see it. Normally I'm working this way, and I will hear some in a minute, but I knew I could show it to you better from this angle, so I'm doing it a little bit reversed. Okay, I'm going to push all this pithy wood off. Now we're getting right down to the knot itself. And I'm going to do, not going to force it. I need to just get up under it and really follow that growth ring well. Okay, so now I'm going to go down below it too and catch this up going the other way. So hold on, we get caught up. Instead of just continuing to work over, I like to work a direction to a knot one way and then come in the other direction afterwards. So the knots are something, knots do not hurt a bow at all, but you need to take your time when working around them. I don't like to leave a lot of mounded up mass. I've heard people talk about that, to just leave a whole bunch of stuff on here. I don't like doing that. If you take it down to the growth ring, it'll be super solid and look really, really well. If it's got one extra growth ring, like right on top, like not out to here, but right on top, that's okay. But what we're doing, I'm going to get up on it really gently, and we're going to pop that off, and we're almost there. Got a little bit more on this side. Teeny bit more. Oops, starting to rain outside. I don't know if y'all can hear that. I got a metal roof here on the shop, so it might get noisy and we might have to take a break. So let's see, but we're almost done with this knot. So now I'm using the edge of the draw knife to just kind of polish that up. There's a little bit of extra ring right around the top. That's perfect. We'll have a little bit we can sand to smooth it up and make it look good. But now that knot is chased, and we didn't rip a bunch of wood out one side or the other by simply just pulling through the knot. Alright, so the last note on chasing a ring is, remember, it's got to be, this is a no compromise situation. It's got to be one growth ring on a piece of Osage Orange from one tip the whole way up, okay? So right now we've got half of it. I've spun the whole stave around. If you make a mistake while chasing a ring, it's gonna happen, okay? You're gonna make mistakes, especially your first time doing it. That's why I didn't say, hey, choose a ring like way down the line. So I've seen a lot of people say this. They'll say, okay, well, let's let the camera focus. You need to look down and find a big thick ring and follow that. No, choose the first solid ring that you come to, unless it's teeny tiny. Choose the first ring, because you're probably going to mess up the first one or two, and next thing you know, if you've tried to hog all of it off just to come down to here, you're not going to have anything left in your bow. Okay, a fat ring doesn't make a better back than a thin ring as long as it's chased perfectly fine. I always choose the very first ring possible on a good piece of Osage. Okay, so if you make a mistake, and even I do, especially because I go so fast, there's times that I do make mistakes and we'll accidentally cut down into the next ring. If you do that, finish chasing that one ring the whole way out, okay? Even if you violated it, finish chasing it. Make sure you don't completely run that ring out, and you find out that somebody cut the stave and there's like 3 or 4 rings down. You end up into a mess that way. Finish that one ring out, then go back and go slow over the whole piece to take it down one more ring, nice and clean. It's not going to hurt to start a whole new ring if you have to. Okay, so I am going to finish this. I got about 2 minutes left, but I'm going to kick you guys right on to the next part. So this will be done in a second, and then we're going to get on kinda how I lay it out, and then we're going to rough it out. Alright, so big philosophy for me is I do not put tape measures on my bows very often, except for measuring the center line. So I'm going to talk a tiny bit about this, but again, the bow building book is going to cover so much more. This is a quick guide to get you through, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the center on this stave. And then I'm going to explain to you why I don't necessarily use measurements outside of the center line. Okay, so let me get this thing to stay on here. So I'm 61 inches, so I'm going to go 30.5 inches is going to be my center line. Okay? If you question your math, always check it out on the other side. Keep your thumb on that spot. That's center. It's important, not super important, but it's important. Put a line on it. Okay? That's done. I'm done with tape measure. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to tell you why about it. Because you can approach primitive bow building with a sense of engineering all that you want. Okay? But it's not going to work. And here's why. Because trees don't grow like carbon or fiberglass, okay? So trees are going to have changes in density through their growth rings. They're going to expand, they're going to shrink, they're going to crook, they're going to do all kinds of different stuff. There is none, absolutely zero magic formula to say how thick does my limb need to be here to be 50 pounds at 28 inches, how wide. None of that stuff matters. Get it out of your head completely now. It does not exist. It will not exist. You could take 2 pieces of wood and make them exact measurements. One that is absolutely a perfect bow, take all the measurements off it, make another one without ever bending the bow, put them to that exact measurements, pull it back, and I almost guarantee you that bow will break, because it just simply doesn't work like that. Wood is a wild thing. It does its own thing. So don't worry about perfect width, thickness, all that stuff, all that kind of measurements. I'm going to tell you why. Now, another piece really got to keep in mind, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I'll touch on it right now, is when you look down a piece of wood, okay, it's not a piece of milled lumber. It's got a couple wiggles. It's got a couple humps. It's got a little knot. It's got a little twist. It's got a little something. This is a good piece of wood. I mean, there's very, very little twist in this. Very, very nice piece of wood. You're probably going to work with something that's got a little bit of a twist. If we have any of that in this, I'll show you taking the twist out. But we'll have another video in showing you how to take the twist out of your bow. But it's not a fiberglass laminated bow. It does not have to be pipe straight. In fact, a primitive bow can have quite a bit of twist in it and still be tillered and shoot perfectly. Shoot perfectly accurate, shoot perfectly straight, and last a very long time. But you do want them as straight and flat as possible. But take that for what it's worth. It does not have to be perfect, so get all of that out of your head. Okay? Natural wood bows are going to have natural features. So, that being said, okay, we've got our center line marked on here. Okay, now, next step, I'm going to pull you in and show you how I'm doing it. I have spent quite a long time working with different things. You can use anything you want. You can use a hatchet, you can use a machete, whatever. This is a knife that I worked really hard with Jason Smith at Hobo Forge, back and forth, working on a knife and saying, hey, this is what I want, and then send it back to him, and he refines it out, and so we sell these. This is what I use every single day of my bow making life, is I use this knife. It is purpose built for chopping bows. High carbon steel, when you get these things, they will be shave sharp, and they are incredibly sharp pieces. That's what I'm using to chop it out. Now, reason I am not using a bandsaw, okay? Yes, you can do it and have some luck with a bandsaw. But I'm telling you right now, if you use power tools on your bow, you stand a huge chance of messing it up because saws cut against grain indiscriminately. Hand tools, chopping knives, I'm going to show you how still, and the draw knife follow the natural grain of the wood. That is a huge, huge secret in bow building for longevity. If you're talking about, when you talk to somebody and say, well, every self bow has an end date, it's going to blow up eventually, completely incorrect, wrong. If you build bows very, very well and you follow the natural grain, they were almost indestructible short of simply pulling them too far. Wood does have a limit, but they will never pop a splinter, ever, if you follow the grain. And that's what we do here at HuntPrimitive, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. So let's bring it in and I'll show you how I'm going to rough this out. Alright, so I'm going to show you the basics here. What I'm doing is I've got a piece of wood down here. I don't do it down on the concrete or something hard because you can end up, when you beat on it too much, you can split pieces of your stave at the end, and you don't want it to do that. So I'm going to take the knife, I go up to where the handle is, which is up here, and I take a rough guess. If you want to draw a Sharpie on that, I'm going to do that. I don't do it personally, but if I'm going to show you how to do it. Put your hand on the center line of this. What we're going to do, I don't lay out lines on my bow to cut them out, and I'll explain as I go on that, because the lines mean nothing. The grain of the wood means everything to me. So what I'm going to do, I put my hand in the center. That means when we shoot the arrow is going to be a little bit above center. That's how I prefer to build them. So I'm going to put my hand right on center between my fingers. Okay, that's where, and then I don't draw on this side, I'm going to draw on this side. This is where my hand is going to fit. Okay, so if you want to put some lines, I don't do it, but you can. Then you know, you got a little bit of a grip area. This bow's not going to have a big grip. If you want to make a bigger grip, that's fine. We're going simple, basic, primitive, because that's what I love. So, now that being said, take the line that you just made on the back, and I'm going to start. I like to hold your foot, but, you know, be careful and don't be chopping your dang leg or your foot. Okay, now what I do is I start at the grip. Now the reason I don't start here is because it's a lot easier to get a good piece started, okay, like this. And now I can hammer it in, and then I pull the knife away, and then pull it out. I can chop it back in, and I can rip off these big pieces. Now this is on the belly side, okay? The back, remember we chased a ring, it's perfect. We don't take anything off of this anymore at all whatsoever, except for a light sanding. Okay, so now, and it's okay to put your leg behind it because you're not going to chop through this piece of wood. And it does not take long to do this with hand tools, and it's well worth it. Get some experience with the hand tools, because this will, as you break these out, it's following the grain. And that's what you want it to do. Okay? See how as I use it and I split it. Now you could do the whole thing with a draw knife, but it's going to take you a heck of a lot longer than it would. You can certainly do the whole thing with a draw knife. And I've done it many a time. But this is how we speed up the process. Avoid putting it on a saw. Please, please don't put it on a saw, because all it takes is for you to not be paying attention for 1 second and you will cut way too thin. I've seen it so many times, and then you take $100 or $200 piece of wood and you just made it firewood. So go slower with the chopping knife than I'm doing. Take your time. Don't be in a rush. But at least the chopping knife is going to slow you down versus how fast the saw is. You can't slow the saw down. The saw is cutting. Okay? So now I eyeball all of this. Again, I don't believe in measurements on them because it's primitive. It's primitive archery. It's supposed to be this way. I look down and I eyeball. So I'm looking at all of this for the width that I'm looking for. And that comes from experience. And there's no shortcut to that. Yet you have to know. You have to just put time in to get experience on bow making. That's That's a huge, huge piece of this puzzle. There's no magic formula. So what we're doing, notice how I'm continuing to work down, because as I split it out, it's taking more and more off. But if I was working the other way, I'd constantly just be taking these little chips out the whole way up, and that takes forever. So start from the grip and work down. And I'm only going to show you this limb. I'm not going to show you the other one, because it's the same exact process. And we're closing in on about having this one roughed out. So I'll switch over here a little bit more so you can see the angle I'm hitting a little bit more. See how I work those pieces down? And I just keep walking it right down. Now this piece has a little bit of crown on the back. What the crown means is the roundness of the tree shows that in its growth ring. So if you got a really big tree, you'll have a very flat back. This one was a little bit smaller of a tree. It's got a slight crown. So these sides are inevitably going to end up a little bit skinnier than the middle, and that's okay. You just don't want it to come right down to, say, like a knife edge. Right now we're still so thick this bow's just not even going to be close to bending. But, and I know it's not, but what you should probably do is stop once in a while and try to bend it. If you don't got any bend in it, you got a ways to go yet. It's another reason you don't do it on concrete right there. If you can hit right against that piece of wood, not going to hurt anything. Alright, so this one is roughed out, but it's certainly not where it needs to be yet. It's still too thin. So now that's when we're going to stop, and we're going to come back and do a little bit more refined hits now. And just slowly chop, instead of trying to remove this big bulk of material. We can come in and just start taking these little smaller pieces to continue to work it down. Okay, so just constantly stop and look at your work. If you get it to where it's too thin here and too thick down here, all the bow's going to bend right here, and you'll lose so much weight the bow will end up breaking. So the goal is it's supposed to be a little thicker here than it is at the tips. So it's thicker here and progressively gets a little bit thinner, a little bit thinner, a little bit thinner, down to probably, we're going to call it a ½ an inch, just so you know, have an idea of what to look for. Okay? And we're going to get this limb worked down, and you're seeing how I'm doing this. And now all it is just time. There's no extra secret to it. You're just going to work it down until it just starts to bend. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead, show you that I've worked it all the way down. It's just going to start to bend, and we'll go on to the next step. Alright, so we're still not bending yet, but now you can see how much material we removed off of this. And you can see it's still the full width. I haven't adjusted the width at all. And the reason is I wanted to knock down some of this mass off the belly. You can see I've not done it on this side. Reduce some of the mass off the belly of this bow. So now we can start working a little bit more on the sides. And the reason I do the belly first is because if you have so much mass on the sides, so much mass this way, and you're trying to work down here, it's easier for the knife or the drawing knife, anything you're working with, to get a hold of this piece of grain and start running hard into the back of your bow and ruin your bow. This side first, then this side, then we'll go back and true this belly up some more. So right now it's still stiff, it doesn't really bend, but we don't want it bending necessarily yet. We just want a tiny bit of flex, like an inch of flex when we push on it. No big deal. Now we're going to change the camera angle, and I'm going to show you working this down and why I don't take measurements. Alright, so same deal as before, like I was chasing the ring. I'm at an awkward angle, so hopefully I don't lose it. This is the back of the bow. We're not taking anything off of that. I'll just keep saying that over and over. Don't touch where you chase the ring. Now, turn the bow on its side, and you're not going to go hogging at it, okay? And just like if you're working the belly or anywhere, don't continue to work the same spot over and over to try to get that down to the level you want, because what's going to happen is you're going to create a big dish that you're never going to be able to work back out. Same thing, that's why we started when we were chopping. We chopped all the way down. We didn't just work one spot and then be patient, work one spot, work all the way down. Same thing here. Draw knife. Do not grab a hold of a bunch and start hogging. Get under a little bit and start pulling and see where the grain wants to go. I'm not cutting. I'm digging it in to get started. Okay? And now and then I pull. All I'm doing is pulling. I'm not trying to dig it in. Okay, now I can go pretty quick. And just keep going. And it's almost very gently. It'll grab where the grain runs itself, the snaky grain of the Osage. If you run this lightly across, it's gonna grab any place that grain has run out. So this is very important. This is why people's bows break. All the time I see it, and I've preached it, and it's amazing how many people still will just saw it out, or they'll take a rasp and they'll rasp it smooth. Your bow will break. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in a month. Someday your bow will break. Now, one of the things I've seen, I'm going to nip it in the bud right now because I'll probably forget. When your bow is roughed out, okay, I've heard people say this because their bow will break during the tillering, and they blame it on the fact that there's a sharp ridge running on the back of their bow right here on this edge, and they say you have to round this edge or the bow will break. You can round this slightly when the bow is finished. I do not round that at all until I have a really idea how this bow is tillered. That's not what causes, it's not the sharp edge that causes it to break, it's the grain run out that causes it to break. So they're looking for something to blame. They're blaming the sharp edge. I have taken bows completely with a full sharp edge, taken them to full tiller over and over and over, and never broken them. You won't, because there's nowhere for that grain to lift if you've caught all of it with this. Okay, so run it over very gently, and you're going to know when you hit a spot because it's going to crawl up under the grain. Now see, I went that whole thing and barely took off anything. That's because I followed that grain really well. Okay, so there I'm trying to dig in a little bit more, but see how it just feathers itself out? So now let's go ahead and hit this side, so hopefully you can kind of see what I'm saying here maybe a little bit more, is I'm not pulling hard. See it pulled in a little bit? See, now there's a spot it caught. Watch how it feathers itself right out. Okay, so now you can always come from the other direction too. You got to be careful. If it ever starts to dig in super far, turn around and come from the other direction. Okay, so we have a knot right here. This knot's right on the edge. We don't need to keep this knot in the bow, or we have enough width. So we're going to actually work down until we can get underneath that knot and pop that knot out. Now you see, this is perfect. This is what I'm talking about with the grain. If you were wondering how the grain works on the back, you can see how that's not a straight line. There's a slight whoop in here because of the knot. So that wants to split itself off and follow the grain. That little whoopy turn should be in the bow when you're done. So we have a little bit more of this knot to get out. If you plane over this, what you've done is you've created a grain run out right here, and it'll pop a splinter. Okay, so use your draw knife. It's not terribly sharp, it's relatively dull. Okay, we're gonna get up under that knot and make sure we pop it out before we're all said and done. If it's got a little bit of remnants of the knot in here left, that's fine. But always let the knife dictate where the bow should be. Always. You don't tell the knife where to go. The knife tells you where to go. That's serious important stuff. It's not just a cool sounding message. It's very, very serious. Okay, so now as we start working a little bit more closer to this. I don't normally put a tape measure on it, but I want you all to see what I'm talking about. This is an acceptable width to work with. I do typically take them down a little bit more. I build by eye. I can't even tell you how wide it is short of looking at it and saying it's probably a little under 2 inches. And it is. It's, what, 1 3/4 right now. By the time it's all said and done, I'll be somewhere probably between 1.5 inches and 1 3/4 in this. But I will do a steady taper from the grip all the way out. Like I almost run parallel to about maybe here. And then I'll start to taper in. You're gonna have a little bit of grain run out here as you taper it in. The thing is, you don't want to make it abrupt. So you have like one little bit of grain run out, then a little bit more and a little bit more. So it's gradual, so it doesn't want to lift. It's when you start cutting across massive amounts of grain, that's when you're gonna lift. And right here is typically the spot of your bow that's gonna work more than anywhere else. You want as little grain run out here as possible, okay? So, that all being said, our tip is still much fatter because I haven't really got to it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep working it out. Now, why don't I draw it out to say where my tip wants to be? Because I am following, and it comes with practice, I'm following the grain, and it's going to tell me where my tip is going to be. Now, of course, there's going to be a little bit of that taper, like I said, so you can kind of have a little bit of influence on it, but you want to take a little bit off one side, like I'm doing, okay, like this, and then you're going to flip it over, and you're going to take a little bit off the other side, and keep going back and forth until this thing starts to tell you where it wants to be. So let's look at that. See, I never stopped to really look at it. I let the grain tell me where it wanted to be. And we got a really nice straight, this is a nice stave, I'm not gonna lie. But we're following the natural contour. Okay? So, we're gonna do that same process on the other limb too. This one's almost done. We don't need to take the tip all the way down to the thickness that we want it yet. Just get it close. And what I'm doing right now, I want a little bit thinner, personally. I want the limbs a little bit thinner. Not much, so I'm going to go ahead and take it down just a little bit more. And let that knife do the work. You see how I can run it like a plane? It doesn't catch. When it finally catches, that's the spot where the grain runs out. So I can go back up here and just catch all the little spots. It doesn't catch, it doesn't catch. Nope, see how it caught? Now it does take practice, okay? It does take practice. And if you do have a little bit of grain run out, it's not that big of a deal. But you may get to a point that your bow may not last for years and years and years. But that's what comes with the experience in bow making. And people want to know why do these bows cost so much money from a professional? Because sure, it may only take us a day or a couple days to build that bow, but it took us 10, 15, 20 years to learn how to make them so they'll last a very, very long time. Professional bowyers do not want their bows breaking, and they do not want to do warranty work. I can promise you, to this point in time, I have made 342 custom bows. I have only ever had to warranty 5. That speaks volumes to what I'm teaching you about following the grain. 5 bows I've had to warranty out of 342. That's crazy, isn't it? Alright, so now we're going to back it up and we're going to start working this belly side down a little bit more. Follow along for that. Alright, so now what we can do is we're going to check it and see how it bends. I already know it doesn't bend super well because it's still a little bit thick. I'm not too far off, probably up here. Down here I'm definitely still thick. So I'm going to go over really lightly, being careful, and keep whittling this down more and more. Now my skill level with the chopping knife, like I said, is going to allow me to move a little bit faster. Take your time. You can even use the draw knife from this point, and I'm going to use the draw knife here in a bit, but I'm not ready yet. I want to work it down with the chopping knife because I'm faster with that, and I'm pretty confident I'm not going to make a huge mistake. Plus, I'm looking at the chevron growth rings, and you'll know what I'm talking about. They'll start to work. I kind of look at these to tell me my thickness as I work down. That's one of those little extra secrets as well. Now, it's okay to brace it with your leg. If you're not going to hit your leg, if a piece of wood's in the way, do keep your thumb tucked in and under during all of this. If you leave it up, you catch your fingernail. When I first started, I ripped my thumbnail completely off chopping because I hit it on a splinter. So whenever you chop, tuck your thumb under and get used to doing that. Okay, getting much closer. So I can chop this thing just about where I want it to be. Perfect. I bet you'll have a little bit of bend now, but not a lot. See, it's still awfully heavy. I'm working on putting together a fairly heavy bow. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go ahead. I'm going to brace it up again against something, and I'm going to use this the draw knife as kind of a plane. Okay, obviously it's not a plane, but the idea here is I'm not trying to dig it and gouge. I'm running it across the top like I was on the sides when I was trying to pull up a piece of run out. I'll do it fast and catch the spots that are higher than everywhere else, and then pull those off. Okay, I'm up against the bad spot. Hold on here 1 second. I don't normally do it right here, but the camera was a little easier to work, so better just to set it up a little bit better now. Okay, see how I work that? Alright, so that's what we're going to do the whole way up and down this to start cleaning it. Now, once it's flat, and if it's still not bending, which I can guarantee you that that's not, and when we need to remove more weight, what we're going to do is take the corner. You don't have to work hard. Take the inside corner edge down, like this, not in the center, and then go on the other side, and take that side down. And what that's going to do is mound it up a little bit in the center, and then that's going to give you somewhere else for your knife to bite, as opposed to trying to bite it into a completely flat surface of wood, which is much more difficult. So now it's got a little bit of contour to it, we can get up under it and get a much better bite with the draw knife. We're going to keep working this down until the bow starts to bend somewhat evenly, and we'll move on and show you that right now. Alright, now most of the time when I work a piece out, I get one side rough and I go ahead and work the other. So it's okay, you don't have to get this side bending before you work this side. I usually take it down progressively, but I'm trying to just work through this side to show it to you. Then I'll work down this side and then we'll carry on from there. I just wanted to get rolling on this while I can. So now I've got to a point where I'm starting to floor tiller. You see how it bends now? I'm not forcing the crap out of it, okay? But I'm putting a little bit of bend on. That's all the more you want to take it, right there. Okay, it probably could use a little bit more out of here. What you're looking for is bend it and see where it's bending primarily. Okay, you don't want it too thin in here, or it's going to bend the tip so much that you'll have to cut the tip off because it bends too much. Leave your tip a little bit thicker than you think you need it. Okay, so I've got this one to a point where it's bending good enough I can start roughing out the other side. There is no true secret to having an eye for floor tillering. That's what this is called. It comes with experience to be able to look at the chevrons, the thickness of the wood, and the feel of the wood as you bend it. So I'm in an okay spot. It's certainly not tillered, but I'm in an okay spot that I can move on to the other limb, and I'll get it where it needs to be. And then we're going to cut some string nocks. We're going to put on a tiller tree and get a base tiller going before we can put a string on it. So let's move on to that step. I'm going to work on this limb here, but we're going to jump you guys right ahead to go ahead and put a couple not crude, but early string nocks on it, and then put a tiller string on it, and we'll just start seeing what the tiller looks like. Alright, it's just showing you how we're bending on this limb, and then this limb. That's good enough for a floor tiller. Just fairly even. It feels about the same. If one feels you have to push way harder, you need to remove material off that. And also be looking for flat spots. You know, if you've got a spot that's not bending nice, isolate that little spot and try to remove a little bit more material. But now let's go in, let's cut a couple string nocks, and then we can go look at it on a tiller tree. Okay, now string nocks. This is the back of the bow. Okay, the side that faces away from you. I know it's hard to see in the video, but I need to make sure I mention that. So this is the back of the bow. What I'm gonna do is just something so you know that as I'm working on this, in case you see it. I'm gonna put a dot right in the middle, just a little one. It'll stand out later. This is the part that faces away from you where we chase the ring. Okay, so our string nocks are gonna do one on each side, and what we want them to do is we're just gonna come down. There's not a perfect place you have to do it. I know where I like to do them. I typically do not ever draw them on. Okay. I'm going to draw them on right now because I want you to see it. Okay, that's where I'm going with this, right there. And then they're going to angle back. So this is the back of the bow. They're going to angle back a little bit to help with some of the string angle. And this is what they're going to look like when they're cut in. Okay, it's the back of the bow. See how they angle back a little bit and then come to the belly. Do not cut anything across here because that'll violate that ring, and you've put enough pressure right. There's going to be a lot of pressure on this tip with the string, and it could fold that tip right off if you cut across the back. Now doing something like tip overlays is a totally different story, different video for a different day, and I have a video on that in the HuntPrimitive How-to Directory and on my HuntPrimitive YouTube channel on how to do tip overlays. And also how to do recurve flip tips, which we're not doing on this bow. Okay, if you want to know how to do that, what you can do is go into the directory and look how to do recurves, how to make recurves, and go look at how to do that, and you can add that into your bow build. Well, we're moving fast on this one. So now I've got a chainsaw file, and I'm going to start on the back side, right on my mark, and I'm cutting these in. And I'm going to follow these lines that I drew, kinda. And what I'm looking to do, I want to cut these in about as deep as my chainsaw file is thick. Okay? Front and back, so it's side to side. So I want to be able to put this in here and rub my finger across it and see that these are as deep, and then just very slightly bevel those sharp edges, and boom, that's done. There's one side done. Now flip it over and I'll get it started. Don't just start hossing on it because you'll run all over the place. Get your line established first, like this, and then you can start cutting into it. And that's all we have to do for right now. Okay? We don't have to take it any further. We don't need to shape the tip down or any of that right now. Okay? So that's it. Bevel that in. Boom. String nocks on this side are done. I'm going to do the other side, then we're going to put a tiller string on it, we're going to take it outside and start looking and seeing how it's bending. One other quick note, you can clean your handle up a little bit if you want. I'm probably at some point going to knock even more off the handle because that's not what I'm shooting for specifically in this bow, but I wanted to leave a little bit more meat on the handle for you to see because that's probably what you're going to build. Most people want some handle left on here. I'll work this down more. Clean it up, but don't round the belly side, because you're going to need, in fact, I specifically go in and put a flat spot on it because I need this to sit on my tiller tree. If you make it round, it's going to roll on you every time you try to pull it back, at least until you get a string on it. So if it's got flat side, it'll hold itself better. So just keep that in mind. Little pro tip there for you. Alright, so we're outside here at the tiller tree, and nothing too fancy. See how it sits on the flat spot there? And then I've got kind of like a little dog leash clip onto a piece of really low stretch rope, and you can see I've got measurements and line in there. And see, it comes down to a pulley, and the rope goes up under that, and then as I step back, I've got a handle here. Okay, so there you go. Now as I pull it, I can watch it bend. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the camera up on a tripod. Just wanted to show you how that worked and what I'm doing with that. So now, tiller string needs to be of good quality bowstring material. Okay, this one's well worn. I've had it for a very long time. I'm not showing you how to make a tiller string in this video or the bowstring, but I will do another video on making a bowstring. Making a tiller string is essentially the same thing as a bowstring. It's just longer and a little beefier. Okay, you can see how it's got plenty of slack on that. Now it doesn't have to have that much slack. I just have an extra long string. But you don't want to put any tension on the limbs at this point. So this is where we're at. I'm going to set the camera up and I'm going to show you what I'm looking at when this bow is bending. Alright, now what you can see, I kind of cheat a little bit and I use the slats in the siding as kind of a leveling tool where I can use that to eyeball a little bit. You can see that the limb on this side has a little bit more reflex. The one on this side's got a little bit of deflex. We may adjust that later. We don't have to right now. Realistically, when I'm doing this for a customer, and so I'm going to do this to that quality, this has that slight reflex. We like that. I'll probably add a teeny bit right there in a little bit. But let's get through this process first, and then I will show you making that adjustment. So I'm going to step back and pull on this. Now, this is one thing I've seen many times where people put it on and they pull it about this far and they say, okay, how's it look? Well, we can't tell anything by just this. So you don't want to yank it back, but you gotta put a little bit of a pull on it to be able to see what you're looking at. Now, what I can see is the areas here by the grip look to be bending a little bit more than the outer lip. I specifically built it to do that because it's easier to remove a little bit more material here later as opposed to removing too much and then running yourself into a problem where you have to lighten your whole bow. So I'm going to stand back here and I'm going to look at it again one more time. Whoops, I'm knocking the camera funny. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, I know very well that I need to remove a little bit more material off of here. So I brought my draw knife and my tool out. We'll set up and I'll just show you how I scrape to remove material. Then we'll set you back up. Alright, it's not terribly exciting, but instead of removing material with the draw knife, now what I'm doing is I'm going to hold it more upright and I'm pushing, I'm scraping, okay, and I'm removing stuff that looks more like this, okay, and that's how we're going to remove material from here on out. Now the amount of material to remove is going to vary depending on how much it's bending or not bending, and that's something, again, you're going to learn to experience. And since both sides needed it pretty evenly, I'm taking it off both sides right now. Clean that up. Alright, that's enough. Always do small amounts like that. And then check it out. I also like to orient my top limb facing to the right on the tiller tree. That's just how I like to do it. And I do it the same way every time. Alright, so we're back up on the tiller tree. We're leveled out. We can start giving it another pull. It's definitely looking a little bit better. I think especially on the left limb, I think it still needs just a little bit more, but keep in mind, Remember, that's the side that has that little bit of reflex on it right here. So it's probably going to look a little stiffer than the other side. But we're very close to getting where we can actually put a string on it. I think we can make it a little bit better, remove a little bit more material, but overall not in bad shape. I may tweak it a teeny tiny bit, but let's move forward. What I want to do is I'm going to show you working on this limb just a little bit, and we're going to pop that little tiny bit of reflex in there. Not much, just a little. Alright, so now back in here I got a little piece of leather. This is the limb that we want to put just a little bit of reflex in. This is a small correction, okay? This is not a big correction. I have the back facing the camera, and I'm just going to put a little bit of tension on that tip, just enough to hold the bow, really. We don't need much. This is a very, very slight correction. If we were doing big recurves or any sort of major wood moving, I would be using steam, because I can get a very, very uniform heat with steam. And dry heat is perfect for little corrections. I use steam for big corrections. So right now, I'm going to use this heat gun. You do not want to scorch the wood, okay? And you don't want to isolate it in one spot. You want to kind of do it throughout the area that you're looking to bend. So you're going to do a little bit on the back, a little bit on the belly. Keep moving it around. And as you get, you can do it, you can still do this with steam. You're going to touch it, it's going to start getting hot. Okay? But we're going to do it just until you just really don't want any color change on the back of the bow. The belly's fine. If you get a little bit of golden brown on the belly, that's not the end of the world. But we really don't want to mess with the color on the back. So you got to be a little bit more ginger with that. And get the sides kind of, just really want to heat this up. Because it's a minor correction, we don't need a ton of heat. If we were having to really shove a piece of wood around, we would have to make sure that this is really uniform. We're going to heat it really well, a little bit slower. And we want to get it to where it's just pretty much almost too hot to touch. Like I said, this is a very, very minor correction. Okay? And then we're going to give it a little tweak, not much, because like I said, I'm not trying to put a bunch of recurve into this. I want just enough that I can pull it, and that's going to stay there. And what we're going to do, I'm going to let it go and see that it's set. Yes, it did. So I'm just going to keep a little bit more tension on it. What you're going to do, you always want to bend it a little bit more than you want it to be, because when you let it go, it's going to rebound and you're going to lose a little bit of that. So we're probably just about there. I like to put just a little tension on it while it cools. And if you do kind of mess up, you can reheat it. So keep that in mind too. If you reheat this again, this is going to come out. It's going to go right back straight the way it was, but only if you reheat it. So just carrying it around in the sun, it'll never get hot enough to take that out. You can make some big corrections with heat on wood, and it does not hurt the bow at all. In fact, you can do a lot of it to make the bow a heck of a lot better, by putting some good reflex in the grip and the tips, and some of those performance add-ons. So once this is cool, all the way cool to the touch, we're fine to put it back on the tiller tree. Alright, so we got ourselves a string made here. You're looking at being a roughly 4 inches shorter than the length of your bow is nock to nock. Nock to nock in length. Okay, about 4 inches shorter. This one's a little bit loose, which is fine. I can give it some twists and tighten it up in a little bit. And we're to that point now where I'm pretty confident that we can go ahead and brace it. I do a step through on it. I don't even do a full step through. It's pretty heavy as of yet, but I am pretty confident that it was good enough of a brace that it was going to be fine. This limb bends a little bit more, as you're going to see in a tiller tree. So we're going to actually, before I even put it on the tiller tree, I'm going to go ahead and just do a couple long scrapes right here by the tiller tree, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it up and we'll take a look at it some more. Okay, so still needs a little bit of work, but we're almost at like a brace height, which is fine. Now keep in mind, I do this for a living, so I'm definitely faster at it than the average person, and also you can't expect, I know what I'm looking for before I ever go into this. yours probably isn't even going to be, and that still needs work, but yours probably isn't going to even be at this point. So when you see that one limb is probably a lot stiffer, say, than another limb, just go ahead and stop. Don't force it. Work that limb down and work on making them bend very evenly, okay? I don't use any special tools, any gizmos, anything like that. What we're doing is we're looking at it with our eye, and we need it to bend very evenly across the whole bow, okay? This is our top limb, because I'm a right-handed shooter, and I typically, you don't have to, but one of the things I do is I make the top limb the limb that's on the right, and that way I'm just keeping it consistent. I'm looking at the same thing all the time, so that way my eye can get trained to what I'm looking for per each limb. I don't get confused. And realistically, the end product, you typically want your top limb to bend a tiny bit more than your bottom limb. Like, I've had a lot more luck overall with the top limb bending a teeny tiny bit more. I want that bottom limb just a little bit stiff, because as things start to settle in, a lot of times you're going to notice that your bottom limb tends to get a little bit weaker over time. That's just the geometry of how you're shooting when your grip is on center. It's just the way it tends to work out. So keep that in mind as you're building, that your top limb, you want it to bend just a tad more. Now, before I continue on too much, how do I determine the top limb at all? What I'm going to do is, and I'm not going to focus a lot on this, I talk about this a lot in my book. Hopefully you can see this. I don't know really that you can. But when you look down this bow, this string is typically going to choose one side of the bow or the other. When you hold it completely flat, it wants to favor one side or the other. The side that it favors, unless it's way off, make that the side that the arrow goes on, okay? Let me tell you why that's important. Why that's important, okay, why that's important to have the string follow that side is it makes your bow a little closer to center shot without having to cut really far into the bow. So then what that's going to do, the benefit of that is it makes your bow far less picky on the arrow spine that it's going to shoot. It'll shoot a lot more arrows the closer the string travels to what we would call the center of the bow. But if the center of the bow is off to the side, that way when we're holding an arrow on the string, if you know what I'm talking about, if you have one that tracks perfectly right up and down the center, when you put the arrow on the string, the arrow ends up sticking out like this. And so now the arrow has to bend really far when you shoot it with the archer's paradox. It has to bend around the bow to start shooting straight again, okay? So now if the string is off to this side like this, then your arrow is much straighter and it doesn't have to bend as far, and you can get away with a lot wider of a variety on arrow spine. So your bow is going to be less picky. Now I've seen people specifically have one that is beautifully off to the side, just a teeny tiny bit, and I'm hoping that y'all can see that it favors this side, that it's just the perfect amount. Like, this one's ideal. They'll work really hard to take that out. They'll put it on and they'll steam it and they'll bend it and they'll bend this thing around so the string runs perfectly right down the center. And what they've done is they've made the bow difficult to shoot with a wide variety of arrow spines. Don't make that mistake. Leave it off to one side. And the side that you say, if you're a right-handed shooter, holding the bow with your left hand, pulling with your right hand, then you want the side that the arrow is on is the side that you want the string to favor. Very, very important stuff if you're looking to make a bow that it shoots very, very well and it's not picky. And so, being that this is my top limb, I face it to the right. Alright, so now I want you to see what I'm looking at, okay? So the limb on the right, I mean, they both need a little bit more work, but as I pull it down, the limb on the right is doing a good amount of bending right here, and it's okay kind of here. It's a little stiff right here. I'm going to pull it back again. I want you to watch that. Both of them do that, but we're looking at this limb right now. You see how it's got quite a bit of bend in here? We're going to remove a little bit more material, and we're just scraping. We'll take 10 or 15 scrapes off of this spot, and then we'll look at it again. All right, so we took a little bit more. I took some off the other limb too, and I twisted the string up to get it right to the brace that I really want. Okay, so right now I'm back to a 22-inch draw, and that's looking pretty good. We can always tweak it a little bit, but sometimes what will happen is you can improve the thing to death. Now, I don't want to pull to 23 until I'm really happy with the way it does look at 22 inches, but sometimes if there's those teeny tiny little spots, it's okay to go ahead and now pull it to 23 and see if that teeny spot changes. If it still looks good, just keep pulling it back a few times to say 23 inches like I'm doing right now, and just keep looking at it. When you can't improve it anymore and saying, okay, it looks pretty good, I'm also looking at my lines on the siding, and then I pull it and it looks pretty even. Top limbs just starting to get a little bit more bent. I'm going to take it to 24. There we are, 24 inches. Looks good. Remember, you're probably going to have to stop and make corrections. I can usually make corrections that are going to last, they're going to get me through a few inches of tiller. But that's simply because I've done so many of these. Expect that every inch you're going to stop and say, okay, it needs a little something here, and you're going to take a few and you're going to check it and you're going to adjust it again. This is kind of the speeded up version, so don't be in a rush. Take a couple hours if you need to and do this right. This is the integrity of your bow, okay? So I'm at 24. It's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to take, a teeny bit right here. I got a little shim. That's what that is, if you're wondering. I'm going to take just a tiny bit, a couple little scrapes. Mostly cleaning it up. Now, this being said, you see, I'm using the draw knife, okay? I know a lot of people that use a wood rasp to do this. If you do it, you're going to mess your bow up, and I'm going to tell you why. Because if you're gonna wood rasp your bow out, especially while you're tillering it, then what's going to happen, you might get it looking perfect, then you're going to go along and try to sand or scrape all of those score marks from the wood rasp out, and it's going to completely change your tiller, and you're going to lose a bunch of weight. So word to the wise, a wood rasp does not belong on the working limbs of your bow. Learn to do it with a draw knife, especially with scraping. You can even use a pocket knife to scrape small amounts. We'll see that later when we start to clean it up a little bit. Alright, let's check it out again. See what we're looking. So now, if you make a correction, stop an inch short just to make sure that you didn't overdo it. We're looking good, so now pull it to 24. Let's go ahead and take it right to 24 and a half. Looks good. And now to 25. This one we're not looking for a ton of draw length out of. This is for a very specific project in which we're testing a bunch of bows for a context of primitive archery video, and so I'm not looking for something with a super long draw. I'm looking for something very contextual to primitive man. We're not going to be using the Dacron string in the study, but for this, in teaching you the mechanics of the bow building, the Dacron string's the way to go. So right now we're almost done tillering this bow for now, okay? And I can put a scale on it in a second. I'll let you know what that weighs. Now I can get into what length your bow needs to be. You need to decide what poundage you want it to be, but also the draw length, the amount that we pull it back, it really is determined by the length of the bow. If you have a bow that's too short and you try to pull it too far, it's going to break. If you have one that's way too long and you only pull it back a little bit, it doesn't build up much energy in the limb. So there's kind of a perfect balance, and I can go over a lot of that, but I'll give you, the problem is there's a lot of different variables, and that stuff's in the book, okay? And if you want to buy the book, you can. If you don't, you don't have to. You can figure some of it out yourself. But kind of a rule of thumb I like to shoot for is if you have a 28-inch draw and you have a rigid handle, meaning the handle doesn't bend like this one, you want your bow to be 66 inches long. You can go shorter. You can go 58 inches and pull that thing back. But if you're talking long term, You want this bow to have a lot of longevity, and you want it to still have good performance and something you can really rely on. I try to stick with a rigid handle bow that's got a 28-inch draw that's about 66 inches long. It's a good size all the way around. 64 is fine too. You start getting less than that, you might start overstressing the bow. I've seen people do crazy bows that bend so much more on a shorter bow, and that works. But take it easy, especially on your first ones. Stick with 66 for a 28-inch draw, and then I usually knock off 1 inch of draw length for every 2 inches. So what you're doing is you're essentially taking an inch off each side of the bow. So if the bow's here, you shrink it an inch. Now you'd be shooting, say, a 27-inch draw, and you shrink it another inch on each side. You'd be 26 inches. So every 2 inches off the bow, 1 inch off each side is 1 inch of draw length you're going to lose. So for example, if you're 66 inches for a 28-inch draw, you'd be looking at 64 for a 27, 62 for a 26. Just kind of a rough estimate. Much more information on that in the Primitive Bow Building book. So we're at a 25-inch draw right now. I think I'm going to check the weight. I don't have to hit a specific draw length. I like this length, about 61 inches with this. I'm going to be shooting for about 25, 26 inches. I'm going to check the weight on it, and then I'm going to decide if I'm going to take it 26 or not. Alright, so I got the scale on it. It's not, you don't really have to see what it's going to say, and my scale's upside down, so it's kind of funny. But it's zeroed out. I'm just going to pull it to 25, and it's a progressive scale, so what it does is it measures the highest weight that it hits. So I'm just going to hit 25 and done. So right now I'm actually 69 pounds. That's pretty darn heavy at 25 inches. So let's go ahead and pull that up here quick so you can see it. I don't mind a very heavy bow. Your average person does not want a 69-pound bow. Really, I was shooting for the 60 to 65-pound range, so we're a little heavy, but that just means that we can now perfect the tiller a little bit more. And also, we're going to lose a little bit as we shoot it in, and then also as we scrape down some of the edges and the corners of this bow, we stand to lose a couple pounds as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fine-tune this thing, get it really where I want it. We'll take one last look at it. I'll show it to you, and then let's get on to finishing this bow. All right, let's take one more look at this here. I think we've got it really where we want it, 25 inches. Looking pretty good. The angle you're seeing, it's a little bit off because I'm trying to pull it. Here, I'll pull it to the side, so it's going to be a little weird for me, but I want y'all to see it pretty straight on. It's 25 to there. So overall, not too bad. We can adjust it ever so slightly, but remember, as we shoot this in over a period of a couple days, and also work out some of our rough spots, the tiller is going to change a teeny tiny bit. So if it needs a tiny bit of adjustment later, it's not a big deal. Don't freak out about it. That's why it's good to leave it just a little bit heavy. Let it settle in, let it naturalize to the humidity, as we just removed a lot of wood. So it's going to have, maybe a little bit more moisture in one spot than another. Give it a little bit of time to normalize, shoot it a couple of days, readjust the tiller and get it perfect. Right now, 25 inches is a good draw because typically I only shoot normally about 22 to 23 inches on my short draw primitive style that I shoot. However, this one I'm going to be drawing a little bit further. I'm doing something a little bit different with it for a future video. So let's just finish this one out the way it is. I want it good and heavy because, like I said, it's about, by the time it finishes that, it'll probably be about 65 pounds at 25 inches. Realistically, at my normal draw, we're going to be looking at upper 50 pounds, which is perfect for me. So let's go on in and start working this thing down to really get it finished out. All right, so far we've done a really good job on the bow. Okay, I took the string off of it. We're getting to a point we're gonna sit down, we're gonna scrape it and sand it in. We're gonna make this bow nice. Now, one of the things I really want to talk to you about, I'm not cutting an arrow shelf into this bow, but I'm going to draw it on here because I want you guys to see this. Okay, this is the top limb, and I'm right-handed. So what I'm looking at is, I'm going to draw it with a pencil. I'm not doing an arrow shelf on this bow because I don't want one. I like to shoot off the knuckle, but what I'm doing is I'm drawing this arrow shelf on where you should cut it in. Okay, bear with me 1 second. An arrow shelf on a primitive bow needs to be relatively slight. okay, like that. That's like max. What you're going to want to do is a slight rounding on here. You don't want it perfectly flat. Whenever you cut this in, what I like to do is I take a hacksaw and I cut in about this way, and then I cut in this way, and then I can take that chopping knife and I'll chop that out, just right off. And that's how I cut it out. I've done that in, I think another video, maybe not, I don't know. It's definitely in my book. And I take that out, and then I'm going to round this edge that's right here. I'm going to round that just a little bit, and then same on this side, I'm going to round it. And that's going to be the shelf. So if you want to have a shelf on your bow, that's how it needs to look. This is a mistake that I see all the time. I want you to look at the fade. That's what we call the fade, and then slope into the handle. Right about here is where it starts bending. Your shelf cut in should not be up into here. If it starts to bend, you can lift a splinter right there and pop your bow. Okay, so as when you want to start cutting in to where the shelf is going to be, it needs to be down below where the limb starts to bend. Okay, that's going to really save your bow long term. The other thing that I see people do is they are wanting to make something that resembles more of a traditional bow that's using fiberglass, that does not rely on wood grain. And I'm going to draw it on here. And they draw stuff on here. They make stuff that looks like this. Okay, they will cut this whole sight window out, and you almost always are going to run out of wood, and you are going to blow this thing up starting right here. Okay, self bows, primitive bows that have handles like this, if you want to make one that has a handle that comes way on out here and do that, that's up to you. This is totally unnecessary, and you should avoid this at all costs. This does not work with wood bows and longevity. This is what you want, not this. This will not make it shoot any better. This will make your bow break. Do not make that mistake. I've seen it so many times. The bows break and then they wonder why. So now if you're going to do that, like I said, cut it in with a hacksaw and then chop that out. And then what you can do is shave your handle down. It's okay to use a wood rasp on the handle. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Stay away from your working limb in the back of the bow. And it's also okay, so here if we're looking, this is the back of the bow, the spot that faces away from us. When you're in a handle that's thick and it's static, it's okay to round in over the back like this. I'm not saying remove this material, but I'm saying you can round it all the way to center because this isn't bending. So it doesn't hurt. So it does not have to be a square back. It can be rounded and comfortable. Where you don't want it rounded too much is on up into here where the limbs start to bend. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm not going to do an arrow shelf on this bow, but I am going to show you working this down a little bit round so you can see at least what it looks like. Now what I normally do, and I'm going to pull you in here and show it as I work the chopper and I work back and forth and I just remove some of the mass, and then you can use a wood rasp. I'm going to put it on the bench sander. That's one of the only things that you will ever see me use a power tool on a bow is the grip, the very refinement of the tips, and then I don't mind using an orbital sander to save time on sanding the bow because we're not removing a lot of material at that point. Those are the only things you're ever going to see me use a power tool on this bow. So let's bring in and let's work this grip down, and then we'll go ahead and shape it and round it up a little bit on the tool, and then I'll show you here. And if you want to use a wood rasp, by all means. I got the sander. We're trying to save time, so let's do it that way. Alright, so again, I'm not doing this on concrete. I got a piece of wood down there. So you got to be careful doing this, because if you get too big of a gouge, you could end up running up into your bow or really messing up your handle. But I want to round this thing up. I want it to be comfortable. In fact, I want the handle a little bit smaller than it is now, because this is a primitive bow to me. This is not, you know, a super. I don't like super modern ones. I make a lot and I've shot a lot for years. The more bows I make, the more I hunt with, the more I like them to have more and more of a primitive look without an arrow shelf. I just enjoy that experience. But that doesn't mean that you don't want a bigger handle and an arrow shelf and all that stuff, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't care who says there is something wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with it. You shoot what you want to shoot, okay? This is what I want to shoot. Okay, I'm getting into a point where if I push this, I could knock a big chunk out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flop it over, and I'm going to come at it from this way and kind of catch it up here in the center. I think I'm about where I need to be. I'm going to work a little bit on the back, and I just slightly roll it, kind of bevel it in. Again, being careful not to run up into the working limb of my bow. But notice here, I work down a little bit, and then instead of carrying it on, because what will happen is it'll run out into your limb, you need to come back in now from the other way and take it out on that side, like that. Okay, so there we go. That's rounded in pretty good. Now, if you do have a bench sander and you want to use, if you want to sit and use a wood rasp and clean this up, that's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that. If you are going to use a bench sander, go slow so you don't dig in somewhere and make a big oops. Alright, we get the handle done. We're just going to go ahead now and just kind of clean the tips up a little bit. Like I said, we didn't do tip overlays on this one at all. All we're going to do is round all of this in and sculpt it. We don't want to compromise. I mean, to compromise the back of the bow up here is not a big deal at all. Just south of the nocks is where you don't want to really get into messing anything up. So you can do just about anything you want to up here as long as you don't cut right across the string grooves. So I'm just going to round these up to make them look a little bit nicer. So before I got too far into that, I just wanted to show you what that was going to look like when we just kind of clean them up a little bit. Now, realistically, what I'm going to do is a little bit of like small diamond style nocks on this, and I'm just going to chisel those out with a knife and then clean it up because that's really the style that I'm going for on this bow. But this is what most people like, so I wanted to show you how to do that. Alright guys, we are really closing in on this one, alright? So that's what I wanted my nocks to look like. Alright, some folks really like them, some don't. Like I said, pretty primitive style bow. If you want to see these nocks, I already did these nocks in my Stone Age bow build tutorial. And it's going to be the same thing, you're just going to use a metal knife to do them instead of the stone knife. But now what you're going to do is go ahead and get you a pretty sharp knife. And we're not using it to whittle or cut. We're going to go over this whole bow and scrape it. And that's how you're going to really get the first finish on this bow, is by scraping. If you just start sanding now, you got a lot of rough spots you're going to have to work through. You'll be forever at it. So systematically start, say, like at one end or in the middle and work one limb out. That's typically what I do, but shoot, I switch them around. I kind of do anything and everything. And you don't want to go crazy on the belly to where you're changing the tiller. But like I said, this could potentially change your tiller a little bit anyway, but we can adjust it later, and we can take the knife and actually really fine tune it. And if you get spots that have like a, we call like a chatter, where you've got like a hard line with draw knife and you keep going, it keeps ticking as it goes over it, well, you're just going to keep making that worse. Turn your knife a little bit sideways and plane over it like this, and you'll notice that line starts to disappear. So that's a neat little trick for getting some of those chatter lines out. Okay, now when it comes to doing the back, especially like around the knot, you got to be really careful. You don't have to get the back super duper smooth by any stretch of the imagination, but what you do want to do is the little like pithy wood, you don't have to get it off. Like that little pithy wood, not going to hurt anything, but I like to get it off because it makes the bow look better when it's finished. So just scrape it and make sure that you're not causing what I call collateral damage. You're so focused on getting this little pithy wood off that, you know, and the pithy wood's here, and you're working it and trying to get it, and the next thing you know, now you just violated a ring because you were being silly with it. So be gentle, be ginger, isolate the little spots you want to hit, but when you do the back of your bow, it should be very, very light to just take the tooling marks out. And you don't have to take the tooling marks out, but it makes your overall product look just a little bit better if it's smoothed up a little bit. Now, these edges here, this is why I mentioned it earlier about having these these sharp edges. Some people are like, oh man, your bow's going to break if you pull it. No, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the grain run out. Now's when I'm going to go, and I don't round it in heavy, because if you round it in super heavy, you actually can get down in these edges and violate some of the grain. Now there is a way that you can do that the whole way up and down, that it doesn't violate the grain, but what's going to end up happening is if you try to round them too hard, you want to round them some, but if you round it too hard and get out of control, you're gonna screw up your back. So the back of your bow, not your personal back. So what I want you to do is just take a couple long strokes, about like that. That's it. Just that. That's all you gotta do. Okay? Now on the belly side, it doesn't matter. The belly side, you're not going to worry about violating the grain. You don't want to remove a lot of material, but you want to take those ugly square edges off anyway. So I got a little bit of chatter in here. You can kind of hear it. I don't know how much, but it's going to keep chattering. So I'm turning the knife sideways now, changing the direction that I approach it, and that's how I'm going to get some of that chatter out. Okay, if you just keep going through that chatter, it'll just make it worse, okay? So I'm going to scrape the whole bow just like this. Now, did you see what I was doing here on the handle too? That got some, breathed in some dust. I can roll it over, and I can get rid of these pencil lines that I drew on for what not to do on the grip. That's not a big deal. Or the cutting in the arrow shell. But you can scrape all of this really, really clean. What you want to do is go over the whole bow, scrape it really clean where you don't see your tooling marks. At this point, it's aesthetics, okay? I'm going to go ahead and do the whole thing. Then you're going to take some sandpaper, sand with the grain, and I like to use 100 grit. You can get just about whatever you need to with 100 grit. If you do it by hand, do 100 grit, and then bump down to 220. And then I like to steel wool the bow to really just kind of buff it down. If you use an orbital, you can just use 100 grit straight and then go ahead and steel wool. You don't even have to steel wool it. But come on, if you're this far into this whole thing, my gosh, you have to know how to use sandpaper. So I'm not going to show you sanding the bow. What we're going to do, I'm going to scrape it, I'm going to finish it. We're going to go out and let's shoot this bow. That's what we've been waiting for. So let's get after it right now. Alright guys, well here's what we're looking at. It's starting to get kind of late on into the evening, but I want to get ahead and shoot. I didn't even sand it. I just finished scraping it, and I was like, nope, let's go shoot it. Too excited to go shoot it. So it looks pretty good. Like I said, we'll probably make a few final corrections, and I'm just shooting this thing off knuckle. We don't need an arrow rest on it at all, or not an arrow rest, a grip at all. You certainly don't need an arrow rest, but you don't need a leather grip. I am going to do a wrapped one. I'll probably do it in another video just because we want to wrap this one up. But we'll get on to different types of grips and string making and stuff in other videos. But for now, make sure that you know, the tiller looks good. We're going to shoot it a couple times. We'll have some fun with it, and then we'll sand it and finish it out. Tell you what, she shoots pretty darn good. Do a nice little shooting session here for you. So that's pretty much it. Doesn't get much better than that right there. I mean, that is right on the money. Alright guys, well thanks for following along on our bow build adventure, and hopefully we helped you get a little bit closer to where you want to be in your own primitive archery and primitive hunting adventures. And make sure you do check out HuntPrimitive.com. We got a lot of good stuff going on over there. We have the HuntPrimitive How-to Directory. Teaches you all kinds of stuff just like this, whether you want to make a knife or make arrows or make atlatls or go hunting, and who knows, arrowheads. We got everything. Anything you want for primitive hunting, it's there, all free on the HuntPrimitive directory. And then of course, if you want to buy bows or bow making supplies or arrows, arrow making, all kinds of stuff on that, HuntPrimitive.com's got everything that you need. And thank you for following along, and we hope to see you out there, and we're going to catch you on the next adventure.